Right now, Rush Limbaugh versus the Pope. Francis continues to defend his attack on unfair economics. Limbaugh attacks the pontiff and defends the status quo. But there's a larger debate to be had on the subject, and tonight it'll be had here on our panel. And then, Big Brother at the NSA. Is he keeping us safe or invading our privacy? A surprising ruling from the federal judge sparks a whole new round of debates. And later, Bloomberg, the series finale. Mayor Bloomberg tries to shape his and the city's future before Bill de Blasio gets on the job January 1. But will either set of plans actually work? Good evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thank you so much for joining us this Monday evening, December 16th. And we begin with an unlikely debate being taken up by two very unlikely participants. Now, we're used to Rush Limbaugh making headlines and prompting debate, but few, I'm guessing, ever expected he would take on a pope. Still, Pope Benedict going back at Limbaugh and others here in a debate that strikes to the heart of income and wealth inequality. I should have said Pope Francis there, excuse me. The two cities or two Americas we're hearing more and more about. Now, this could well end up as the dominant domestic policy issue in our country in the coming years. I really believe what we're talking about today will play out not just 2 years from now, 4 years from now, but forget about the political cycles, how we look at what we can and can't afford and what we should or shouldn't cut back on. This also speaks to the kind of government that we want and the kind of society we think that we should be. And it certainly makes food for thought as we approach this holiday season. So let's get you up to date on the setup now, and I'll bring in Andrew Whitman because we're trying to tie in a lot of different angles, but they all come to the same point, whether it's a radio talk show host, the Pope in the Vatican, elected officials, or people who want to be elected. They're all coming back to the same thing, is to a limited pot of money, but how do you distribute it?
And that's the question, Rich, but it really is an extraordinary debate going on between Pope Francis and Rush Limbaugh. We've touched on this subject in this debate before, but we want to give you at home a little more meat from both sides. This debate began last month with the Pope's writing in a major paper reminding all that the rich must help, respect, and promote the poor. But the pontiff went on and he said, we also have to say, thou shalt not to an economy of exclusion and inequality. Such an economy kills, he wrote. Can we continue to stand by when food is thrown away while people are starving? This is a case of inequality. Today, he continued, everything comes under the laws of competition and the survival of the fittest, where the powerful feed upon the powerless. People continue to defend trickle-down theories, he wrote, which assume that economic growth encouraged by a free market will inevitably succeed in bringing about greater justice and inclusiveness in the world. This opinion, which has never been confirmed by the facts, the Pope said, expresses a crude and naive trust in the goodness of those wielding economic power and in the sacralized workings of the prevailing economic system. Meanwhile, he wrote, the excluded are still waiting. The imbalance, the result of ideologies which defend the absolute autonomy of the marketplace and financial speculation. And he said a new tyranny is born, invisible, often virtual, and unilaterally and relentlessly imposes its own laws and rules. That from the Pope. Now enter Rush Limbaugh. Rush cast himself in the role of defending capitalism, doing so by referring to Pope Benedict as the Vatican's Obama, and then
to hear the Pope regurgitating this stuff, I was profoundly disappointed. The idolatry of money, urging politicians to attack the structural causes of inequality and strive to provide work, health care, and education to all citizens. This is an unfettered anti-capitalist dictate. This is just pure Marxism coming out of the mouth of the Pope. Pope Francis said that trickle-down policies have not been proven to work.
This weekend, the Pope, in an interview, countered Limbaugh directly, telling the interviewer, Marxist ideology is wrong, but I have many Marxists in my life who are good people, so I don't feel offended. There's nothing in the exhortation that cannot be found in the social doctrine of the Church. And the Pope added the promise was that the glass was half full, or when the glass was full, it would overflow, benefiting the poor. But what happens instead is that when the glass is full, it magically gets bigger. Nothing ever comes out for the poor. As Rich mentioned, this is not just a debate between the Pope and Rush Limbaugh. President Obama waded in on this subject recently, calling income inequality and a lack of social mobility in the country a major problem for our nation, one that runs contrary to the spirit in which the U.S. was founded, a pattern that he pledged to focus on and to change. We've seen this gap shown on in full display by last week's New York Times profile of Dasani, the homeless 12-year-old girl, and the struggle she and tens of thousands of New Yorkers like her face. Challengers the Democrat Bill de Blasio described as the two New Yorks, an argument that seemed to appeal to voters and catapulted him to both the Democratic nomination and to a nearly 50-point win in the final vote for mayor. And it's one that's hammered home in this sobering stat from the Census Bureau, that in 2012, 21.2% of New Yorkers, or nearly 1.7 million people living in New York City, did so in poverty. This at the time that many would say New York hit its new highs for the top end. And Rich, as you've been bringing us back to it on RFL time and time again, this is a subject that impacts so many decisions that we have to make with our domestic policy and beyond.
Oh, we're seeing it now, Andrew, aren't we? We're seeing it in the budget discussions, the farm bill as it relates to food stamps. So where the safety net can or can't stop, unemployment benefits, where you're going to limit for when it's going to extend. You'll see it play out as cities will face bankruptcies and who will or won't help for help. But it's more than just policy. And I found, at least I was riveted by that 5-part series that the Times did on Dasani and really her family. And it was a picture of homelessness for children and the huge numbers, the thousands in New York City alone that fit that description. Anyway, I brought up the subject this weekend to good people, not bad people, I'm not going to ascribe some malicious intent, but it was fascinating the conversations that happened from some of the same people who, even if they didn't read the whole series, knew at least enough about it where they felt they could have an opinion. And not everybody was sympathetic to that young girl's plight or her family's. I've heard variations of, well, why did the parents have so many kids? How do we know that they're not going to cheat with the food stamps they get? You know what? Maybe some tough love and cutting them off will make them better and more inspired to get out there. I just sat back, because I got a 12-year-old daughter myself, and I compared the life that that kid has to the one that mine has. And many of you can relate out there, I'm sure, into similar circumstances. And the idea that we present, that forget about a level playing field, that we're even in the same ballpark with these kids, and that we can so casually say, you know what, they should suck it up. It's a conversation in microcosm that is playing out, I believe, on a whole range of subjects. I think it's going to define how we look at things going forward in this country as to what responsibility we do or don't have. And more than that, I think it really speaks to what kind of a country, what kind of a government, and politically what will and won't play here going forward. I think you're going to hear this debate happening about raising the minimum wage, and it's going to be very interesting how the parties and the politicians stand on that issue as well. So when we come back, we're going to bring in 3 of our favorite panelists. One, of course, you know, is Dominic, but a few of the familiar faces as well. And we're going to have this conversation, not just the here and now, but also going forward. Where does America stand on this? And here's our question for you at home. Haves and have-nots. Is the economic fairness that you heard articulated by the pontiff of all people an issue that can and will drive your vote in the coming midterms, next presidential election, and beyond? Your reaction and our panel back after this.